Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Ramble, a series of videos about the upcoming election and why it makes moral and economic sense to vote for Joe Biden. This is our last video that we're going to put out before the election, and in this video I want to talk about specific policies that are on Joe Biden's platform that conservatives might be particularly worried about or concerned with. In all honesty, I think all of these topics deserve their own video, and we just simply don't have the time or the energy to produce a whole video about each one of these topics. So I apologize in advance that this will be a little bit less detailed. But the reason why I want to talk about them is I just think there's a lot of misconceptions that are out there about each of these topics. And I want to actually kick off the video and spend a little bit of time here discussing why there are misconceptions, and hopefully that can guide people who are interested in how to find good information about these policies and how to think through them more clearly. So let's talk about why these misconceptions exist. And I think by and large, the reason why people have a lot of misconceptions, and this is true on both sides of the political spectrum, is because they consume misinformation. We hear a lot about media bias and fake news these days. In fact, I think it's been one of the most politically savvy moves of Donald Trump to really push hard on the fake news rhetoric. And if you think about what this does for him, what it does is it insulates him from possible scandals, because people who buy into the fake news rhetoric will sort of, they instantly dismiss any piece of information that disagrees with what they believe, and therefore anything that is critical of Donald Trump they just dismiss. And at the same time, it allows him to push disinformation about his political opponents, because the media, which might fact check him, is not trustworthy, and then people sort of don't trust it. So I think Donald Trump has used this largely to his political advantage. But at the same time, I do recognize that pretty much all media is biased, and definitely all politicians are biased. And I think more and more as people have come to recognize that, you end up with people that kind of ended up doing one of two things. And I've heard both of these things a lot. One is, I think a lot of people kind of throw up their hands and they say, I don't know who to trust anymore. I don't really know what even to believe. And they end up just disengaging from political debate or even thinking very hard about the issues because they view everything as untrustworthy. The second thing that people do, if they don't do that, is they end up sort of only consuming information that they already agree with, either on the far right or on the far left, and they get in these echo chambers, which I think people have heard a lot about. And neither of those outcomes are good. You don't want to have people ending up in echo chambers, because that just drives us further and further apart. But we also don't want people giving up on truth and finding truth and understanding actual information. And so I just want to talk for a second about how to combat that. And I think the place to start here is to think about, why do media write articles or produce television shows? And they do it because they want people to watch it, because that's what their revenue is based on. It's through ads or through subscriptions. So we have to stop and first look in the mirror and ask ourselves, why am I clicking on this article? And I would break it down for me and for most people into one of three reasons. First, maybe I'm reading this because I want new information and I want the truth. But secondly, I think a lot of articles are aimed more at me reading something that I already believe, and I get a dopamine hit in my brain when I read something that I already agree with, and I recognize, other people agree with me, and that makes me feel good about myself. Or I think even sometimes people read articles that they disagree strongly with, and they again get that dopamine hit because they read the article and they think, oh, look how dumb all of those other people are who believe this stuff, and I know that I'm right. Of those three reasons, only one of them is actually a good reason, I think, to be going and looking and reading news articles, and that's to find new information. So for me, the place to start is to think pretty carefully before I click on an article, why do I want to read this? And am I personally open to new information? Am I open to reading something that potentially I might disagree with and recognizing maybe this other person has some valid points? And I'll be totally honest, this is something that I'm constantly fighting against, that I feel like I'm still not great at. I think all of us as human beings, when we hear something we disagree with, our knee-jerk reaction is to be defensive, to think immediately, why is the other person wrong? and never asking ourselves, why could they be right? And I think we have to ask both of those questions. I don't think you need to bias one side or the other. You need to ask, why could they be right, and why might they be wrong? But all too often we focus only on why are they wrong. So first and foremost, I would strongly encourage people to ask yourselves, are you open to new information? Because if we're not, we're never going to learn anything new. The second thing that I want to point out, and this is again true on all sides of the political spectrum, is let's recognize the tactics that politicians use, and even sometimes the media use, to try to sway us, and tactics that are biased. It's okay to be persuasive, but I think we want to fight against bias. And I want to point to two among many tactics that are out there. The first one is oversimplification. In general, what politicians try to do is take something very complex and boil it down to a one-sentence, drastic oversimplification. So for me, red flags are when I hear people say things like, it's that simple, or why can't you understand? Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to say this very complex topic that has like decades of research and a lot of facets and nuances can be boiled down into one sentence. So for example, people say, abortion is murder, it's that simple. When the honest truth is, like, this is a very complex, difficult topic that like we created a video on, and like, you know, our video I don't think encapsulates everything that we feel or could cover all of the topics that people are worried about. Or on the other side, people say, guns kill people, so we should control them. It's that simple. And I worry about taking complex things and boiling it down. Now, the reason why this is enticing is complexity is hard work. It's hard work to like go through and think about carefully. And so I would love it if someone could take something complex and boil it down into one sentence. But the honest truth is, if they're doing that, they're probably putting lots and lots of bias in what they're saying. The second tactic I'll point out is the use of fear. I think a lot of times politicians try to use fear to get the emotional parts of our brain moving. And research has shown that when our emotions start to ramp up, our critical and rational thinking starts to come down. So this is in a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Danny Kahneman, for which he won the Nobel Prize. And I think it's just like really helps me think about, you know, it's fine to have emotions, and I think those are part of our political decisions, but we can't let those override our rational thinking as well. And so when I hear statements that are positioned in particular to make me feel fear, that's a red flag for me. So things like people saying, oh, Kamala Harris wants more third-term abortions. That's something that sounds really terrible, and I think it's motivated to create an emotional response rather than rational thinking. Or Democrats really want socialism, and people feel really strongly about socialism, and it's designed to invoke this emotion. So my opinion is, like, watch out a lot for those types of statements, because they're probably trying to invoke fear and override your rational or critical thinking. So, you know, I would encourage people to actually go and look up some other sources about media bias. I would point people towards the website allsides.com, which ranks different media sources by how biased they are, either liberal or Republican, and try to focus on the more centrist, the more centrist outlets. And also, the Cornell University Library has a whole guide about how to deal with fake news that I would recommend people go and check out. Okay, so with that in mind, let me just give a really quick list of some policies that I've heard a lot of people talk about that they're concerned with that Joe Biden has. And I'll start with socialism. This is something I feel like we've heard a lot about. And the fear is that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want to make us a socialist country, or they promote socialism. The truth is, socialism is a system of government where the government essentially controls the economy. And there's nothing in Joe Biden's platform that promotes nationalizing any industry or sort of moving towards socialism. What are they promoting? They're promoting redistribution of wealth to enhance social welfare programs, which is different from socialism. And as I discussed in a previous video, the vast majority of academic research, especially the best research that has come out in the last 20 years, points towards most of these social welfare programs as being good investments for the economy. And in fact, an article I just read today shows that the majority of these policies actually increase tax revenue in the long run by helping poor people sort of get into a better situation where they pay into the tax system. The second policy I'll mention is gun control. I know this is a very important issue for a lot of Republican voters, and the fear that people have is that Joe Biden is going to take away our guns. I think that's the statement that people use. It's just a dramatic oversimplification of the truth and trying to play on people's fears. So if you look at Joe Biden's platform, what does he actually propose? He actually proposes banning the manufacture and sale of new assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. His plan should not affect normal hunting weapons. And for people who already own assault weapons, he would require them to undergo a background check and register their weapons. And if they'd rather not do that, they have the option to sell their weapon back to the federal government. He also has a proposal to limit the purchasing of firearms to 1 per month. Seems like a pretty reasonable limit to me. And to require background checks for the sale of all guns. So for me, like on this particular issue, the U.S. has more gun violence per capita than almost all third world countries, let alone other developing countries. And it seems pretty reasonable to try to put in sensible gun control, and nothing that Joe Biden has proposed would actually take away people's guns, especially not guns that are used for normal recreation like hunting. I'll talk next about healthcare. To be honest, healthcare definitely deserves a whole series of Ramble videos. It's a super complex topic that I'm still learning a lot about myself. But the fear that I want to address is people being worried that Joe Biden wants to socialize our healthcare system entirely. In reality, what Joe Biden wants to do is he supports a public option for health insurance, but he does not advocate for socializing medicine. And essentially, I think what he wants to do is protect Obamacare. What has Obamacare done? Well, in the 8 or so years that it's been in place, it certainly hasn't destroyed our healthcare system. It's provided healthcare protection for around 20 million Americans, and it's done a lot to protect people with pre-existing conditions. And so, you know, like this is what Joe Biden is promoting. Now, I will be the first to recognize that I don't think his proposals are going to really solve the healthcare system entirely. But when I think about people who are having to choose between providing healthcare for their families or providing food for their families, it's hard for me to disagree that we should have a viable public option of healthcare for those individuals. An additional claim that I've heard people make is that they like Donald Trump because he promotes religious freedom, and they're worried that Joe Biden will infringe on their religious rights in some way. We mentioned this in previous videos, but I'll reiterate here again. I don't think Donald Trump has a very good record on religious freedom, in particular with regards to Muslims. And in fact, when he was trying to institute the Muslim ban, my church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, put out a letter explicitly against the Muslim ban and cited religious freedom as the reason why they were against it. And in particular, I think a lot of the talks by our church leaders have focused on religious freedom for all, not just religious freedom for members of our church or Christians in particular. We should also recognize that Joe Biden is a religious man. He goes to Mass every Sunday. He's talked openly about his Catholic faith for many decades. And so it seems like maybe these are trying to play on our fears of losing our religious freedom, when it seems a little bit far-fetched to think that that Joe Biden, as a very religious man himself, would want to promote policies that reduce our religious freedom. And in fact, if you take a look at his platform and his policy about religious freedom, what he does is he puts it under the umbrella of a broader anti-hate agenda, where he wants to partner religious freedom with stronger prosecution of hate crimes more broadly against religious groups or other protected groups. And this is actually pretty similar to policies that the Church of Jesus Christ has promoted, where they're trying to partner religious freedom with protection of other groups like the LGBTQ community. I would say Joe Biden's policies are very much in line with that type of an idea. So like I said at the first of the video, I could only give a really, really quick hit on each one of those topics, but hopefully it's a little bit useful. And my overall message from this video is don't let your fears or oversimplifications override your critical thinking and logical thinking about each one of these issues. I highly encourage people to go out and kind of do their own research and come to their own conclusions. And I hope that our videos have been a little bit helpful in pushing people along that path. Thanks very much for watching.